And now we're going to be joined by someone who was there that day anchoring GMA. Our friend, former GMA anchor, World News anchor Charlie Gibson, joined us now. He was on the air at 9/11 when the towers hit. Charlie, thanks for joining us again this morning. I want to start out by just playing that moment when the plane hit the tower.
Good Morning America was in progress in the East Coast and the Midwest, but we're joined by the entire network just to show you some pictures at the foot of New York City. This is at the World Trade Center. Obviously a major fire there, and there has been some sort of explosion. We don't fully know the details. We just saw another plane coming in from the side, so this looks like it is some sort of a concerted effort to attack the World Trade Center that is underway in downtown New York.
Charlie, nothing can prepare you for a moment like that.
No, George, you're right. I've heard Michael say a couple of times now the GMA is remembering 9/11 20 years later. I don't think there's a day that goes by that I don't remember it. It's so etched in your memory, and everybody, of course, can tell you without hesitation where they were when they learned about it, what they did. We were, as you and I have discussed, we were in a commercial at the time. Stu Schwartz, who was our control room producer, we had just gotten the 30-second cue that we were about to go back on the air. Diane and I were going to have to fill a couple of minutes, and Stewie said, something's happening at the World Trade Center. We have a traffic camera poised on the building, WABC traffic camera. You're on the air, go. And with no preparation and no thought, it was just a complete surprise to us. But as you know, George, you go into reporter mode, but the last thing you want to do is indicate to anybody that you know more than you do. And at that point, we just didn't know anything. And so we were madly writing notes to, when was that earlier bombing at the basement of the World Trade Center? How many years ago was that, et cetera? But we were just bewildered. But I knew that this was going to change Good Morning America and the country for some time to come. You just knew this was a completely transformative event.
Charlie, you said you didn't want to tell America what you didn't know. That's so important in a situation like that. But you did say, we heard you say just there, this looks like some sort of concerted effort to attack the World Trade Center. Where did that sense of clarity come from?
Well, if there wasn't really clarity, you're nice to think that it was. When the second plane, you knew it could not, this was not an accident. When that plane came in, you knew that somebody had to be trying to attack the World Trade Center, and in so doing, since those were such iconic buildings, the country was under attack. We didn't know how extensive this was going to be. Indeed, the United States government didn't know how extensive it was going to be for quite some time. Witness the fact that they were very reluctant to bring the president even back to Washington. And then as the day played on, of course, obviously we knew about the attack at the Pentagon. For a while, there was a rumor that the State Department had been hit by a plane as well. That proved not to be correct. And then, of course, Shanksville occurred. And I'll never know exactly what that plane in Shanksville, that went down in Shanksville, where it was aimed. My guess, it was probably aimed at the United States Capitol, where I had worked for 7 years covering the House of Representatives. And I think about all those people at the Capitol who, who knows what would have happened if they had been able to bring down the dome or something. I mean, it was just so cataclysmic what was happening. Peter Jennings got into place about 45 minutes after the planes hit. Diane went down to the site to try to get as close to the trade centers as she could with the crew. ABC had leased a boat up on 96th Street on the Hudson River, and they wanted me to get on that boat, go down the Hudson, and try to get pictures from the river of the trade centers. But needless to say, the police department had everything blocked off, as they should have. And so I went back to the studio. I remember David Weston saying to me, please stand by. You may have to sit down and anchor for a while when Peter gets tired, because we're going to be on the air for several hours. And I remember saying, David, we're going to be on the air for several days. And indeed, of course, that proved to be the case. But you do, Cecilia, go into reporter mode. Diane's reaction was, oh, my God, when she saw the second plane hit. And mine was the sort of who, what, why, where, when, we're under attack. I sort of wish I'd had her response. She said she wished she'd had mine. Somewhere in between was probably the right way to react. But you just go on instinct at that point.
And as you said, Charlie, it was a marathon. There were no breaks of any type for you both. You were on air for days, basically. And there was a wave of patriotism after 9/11. How did you balance, as you said, your emotions with being a journalist, with being objective, but still with the emotions and the patriotism that you have yourself?
Well, that's a really interesting question, Michael, because you do have to balance things. I remember I was sort of on automatic pilot on the morning that the planes hit, but it was the day after. You know, we had worked for 18 hours. We went on the air at 6 a.m. For the entire country, an hour earlier than GMA normally goes on, and we had just pulled a table into the center of the studio because we didn't know fully what was happening still, and so we just thought, this is America's breakfast table, and we'll be at the breakfast table just along with you, and no fancy sets, just a table in the middle of the studio. But I remember walking into the studio that morning on the 12th and thinking to myself, you'll never do a more important broadcast than you're about to do. This is something that you have prepared your whole life for. And tone is going to be as important as the guests and what you actually have in terms of people that you're going to talk to, subjects that you're going to address. Tone is important. And so obviously there's an enormous amount of empathy, an enormous amount of just emotion. But at the same time, I remember thinking we've got to project resolve and we have to project reassurance that as a country we're going to get through this. And I don't want to sound like a Boy Scout about this, Michael, but Good Morning America, that name is really important, and that is something you always keep in mind. And I thought we're just going to, Diane and I are going to be joining America, and we're going to be sitting there trying to figure out what's happened. And that was our approach really for weeks. And I can't imagine anybody that would be more steadfast to sit next to than she was. And we said to each other that morning, if you start to cry, I'll pick it up. And there was many a time in the days that followed that we needed to act on that.
You say you think about it every day. Could you have imagined then how much those attacks would change this country?
No. No. First of all, as we've talked about, George, we're a nation, if you study history, we're a nation that's been protected by two oceans. And we have had security in our own land. And that took away that notion. We could be under attack at any time. And Dick Cheney, the vice president, gave a speech a few days after the attacks and said, this is the first war, because we got a war on terrorism, this is the first war where more Americans will be killed on domestic soil than overseas. Well, of course, he couldn't anticipate Iraq and Afghanistan, and the Civil War, obviously, but what he said was true, and it's always been in my mind that in those days afterwards, that when you drove through the Lincoln Tunnel, when you went across the Golden Gate Bridge, when you put your kid on a school bus, it was just a little act of courage, because we didn't know, and we still don't. We still have that sense that we can be vulnerable, but also I was so heartened by what happened in the days afterward. You know, the Congress on the steps of the Capitol all singing "America the Beautiful." We were united. The President of the United States had an 85% approval rating. That was so important. We as a nation bonded together, and on every barn in the Midwest there was an American flag hanging or whatever. The pictures across the country that we had in days afterward were so inspiring. What happened to that? Now we're arguing, over whether or not you should wear a mask to save lives. What happened to that unity? And that's, as I think about this 20 years later, I so worry about the fact that we are so divided now as a nation. And at that time, we were really, really united. And that hope that we could essentially someday get back to that, it just sticks in your mind.
Charlie, thank you so much for sharing your experience with us. It's been absolutely amazing to hear your perspective on all of this. Really appreciate you. Can't thank you enough.
Thank you, Charlie.
Thanks, Charlie.
Thank you, Charlie.
Michael, George,
Well, hey there, GMA fans. Robin Roberts here. Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Lots of great stuff here. So go on, click the subscribe button right over here. to get more of awesome videos and content from GMA every day, anytime. We thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the morning on GMA.